Hi, well, good afternoon for me, good morning. My name is Aga Burzynska, and I'm Associate Professor at the Colorado State University. And thank you so much for having me here. I'm really delighted to be here and present our work. And I'll be talking about the effects of dance on brain structure, function, and cognition. But as you can see, I added a little bit to the title. So I want to talk about this in the context of brain aging and dementia. So actually, first I wanted to start with what drives the research in our laboratory. And this is the fact that just in the United States, where I'm currently residing, there's 5 million people affected by dementia, further 7 million with mild cognitive impairment, and over 40 million people that are 65 or older will experience normal yet significant extent of cognitive decline. And it is the cognitive decline, not physical disability, that often disrupts the ability of people to live independently. So we are interested in the neural mechanisms related to Alzheimer's disease and cognitive decline with the hope to address them. And here you can see that it's a pretty common knowledge. I'm pretty sure most of you are familiar with those facts that Alzheimer's disease neuropathology is related to accumulation of amyloid plaques and tau tangles that is related to brain atrophy, neuronal loss, especially in the hippocampus. And this knowledge drove development of drugs in the past decades. And in USA, FDA approved a new drug that targets amyloid plaques last year. However, we know that this drug has so far only limited effects on clinical outcomes. It only slows down progression of the disease in the early stages and has side effects, costs, and so on. Therefore, in our lab, we are looking for new brain targets for therapies. And here you see again the same picture, but what we are interested in is this axon with myelin that is often overlooked in a lot of Alzheimer's disease papers. So the white matter that consists of myelinated axons. And it's very interesting because in last year, and it's by a group in Germany in Göttingen, they really showed evidence that white matter degeneration can proceed or even trigger amyloid plaque formation. So that's why you will hear a lot in my talk about the white matter. And when it comes to new interventions, I'll be talking about dance and exercise because those interventions are widely available, they are cheap, they are safe, and they are also fun. So now the problems that we face with exercise, as we grow older, we typically lower our physical activity, especially at those higher intensity levels. And if we do exercise that's more adjusted for our age and physical ability, this type of exercise often becomes a little bit routine and boring, and we often lose the motivation. So this is where I find dance a very particular type of motion that combines physical activity, play, fun, learning of the skill, but also it has this social component. And on top of it, when we look globally, it is age, culture appropriate, and also often more accepted in certain religious settings. So my talk will be divided into two main parts. First, I will talk about the structural and functional impacts of dance expertise in young professional dancers. And then in the second part of the talk, I will present results from a clinical trial where older people were dancing, and we will see what happens with their brains. So the first study, we recruited professional young dancers from the University of Illinois School of Dance. And we were interested whether the type of training they perform, whether this shows any transfer into other cognitive abilities. And we were also interested whether dance training is related to changes in brain function, brain morphometry, and brain connectivity. So how did we select our participants? When it comes to dancers, we made sure that they had versatile dance training because previous work has shown that ballet dancers tend to be really underweight, and this may also affect their brain structure. And we also made sure that they either had substantial history of dance training or they have been training really intensely in the past 3 years. And then our non-dancers, we made sure that they had no history of dance training. And also we interviewed them and made sure that they are not doing any similar forms of physical activity, such as martial arts, yoga, gymnastics, for less than 3 years, less than 2 hours per week. And first, I wanted to show you that we successfully managed to match our participants on age, BMI, education, and fitness. And our sample consisted, I believe, only of females because that was the kind of population in the dance school. So you can see that our participants were on average 21 years old, had normal BMI, education, and they also did not differ on their resting heart rate, which was a measure of fitness. We also succeeded in making sure that they substantially differ on their dance training experience. So the controls, they did not, it was not applicable when they started dance training, and they really showed very minimal engagement in similar activities, whereas our dancers started their dance practice on average at the age of 6, had on average 12 years of dance experience, and dance about 14 hours per week. And then we wanted to check whether dancers are really better at dancing and kind of dance mimicry. So we made our participants play a video game. Oh, I was not really, didn't plan to play the sound, but this is our dancer, Angelica. And you can definitely see she is a dancer, that her way of reading the video is really precise. And I'm not showing non-dancers such as myself because it would not be very pleasurable to watch. And the video camera recorded % of correct moves. Okay, and then we designed another task to measure balance. And this is again our friend Angelica. So we made this task more difficult to avoid ceiling effect. She's asked to stand off this pretty wobbly foam pad on one leg and close her eyes. And we measured how long she can stay like this without falling. We also expected dancers to perform better. And indeed, dancers outperformed controls on both tasks. So both balance and dance game, they showed significantly better performance. And what is also interesting, that the longer they practice dance, the better they did in the Dance Central video game. And I attended several of the practices to really see what dance school, the dance training entails. And here you can see a teacher presenting a dance sequence.
Here, and then we'll go over the count structure in a second. But I want to have this moment of, hey, mama!
So as you can see, dancers, have to repeat a sequence, also pay attention to their expression. So that's why we expected our dancers to be better at sequential memory, spatial working memory, and relational memory. But to cut the long story short, we actually did not find any cognitive differences between the two groups. And then we turn into brain imaging, and we wanted to see whether our dancers express the action observation network in a different way than non-dancers. An action observation network is a series of brain regions that get activated when we observe emotion, especially something more sophisticated such as dance. And it activates several regions such as premotor, supplementary motor cortex, and higher visual regions. And here you can see again our dancer Angelica being ready for an MRI experiment. where she will be inserted into the MRI scanner. We put a head coil on, and in the scanner, we will present her certain stimulation that I will show you in one moment. So we designed an fMRI task to activate the action observation network, where we interleaved the control clips that consisted of animate motion with dance clips. And the idea was to subtract brain activity between those two conditions. Here's an example of a dance clip where participants were instructed to try to imagine that they are actually performing this dance. And we made sure that those clips were easy enough that even our non-dancers could not find it very strange imagining those motions. And here, the animate motion was matched a bit of speed, color, and detecting animate motion, but we wanted to make sure that there are no emotionally loaded scenes. So when there were like giraffes walking on the savannah, we made sure that there's not a lion grabbing them, because we did have such option. So what we saw is that we successfully could activate action observation network in both groups. So this is both groups combined. In red, you see the brain activity. And here you can see that dancers indeed activated the action observation network to a greater extent in several brain regions, such as basal ganglia, higher visual, precentral, and frontal regions. And next, we also looked at the resting state functional connectivity. This is where we take a seat and a target region in the brain, and we look at those spontaneous fluctuations in the brain function, and their co-correlation reflects functional connectivity. And we used as seed regions the motor learning system network, and we found that dancers differed from non-dancers in kind of two opposite ways. We saw that in some brain regions, dancers has greater functional connectivity, whereas in other regions, they had lower functional connectivity. But what is important that in both cases, there was a consistent correlation with the performance on the dance video game. So if they had greater functional connectivity, then this was related with better dance performance. And in other brain regions where the connectivity was lower, then it was still correlated with better performance. And finally, we looked at the structural connectivity. So we used diffusion tensor imaging to look at the differences in the white matter microstructure. And we actually observed a bit counterintuitive lower fractional anisotropy in dancers than in non-dancers. But it was important that it was located in the posterior limb of the internal capsule, so in the corticospinal tract that conveys the signals between our motor cortices and the body. And also, although it was in the opposite direction that we noticed, it had the expected correlations with functional connectivity and the video game performance. So when there was a greater connectivity, there was a better game performance, and there was lower fractional anisotropy. And this is not too surprising because lower FA has been observed in younger people that would be lower in the cases where they were actually having where they were showing greater cognitive performance. So to sum up, we found no evidence for cognitive transfer related to dance training. I did not show it, but we also compared our groups on their cortical morphometry, and we found no differences in brain volumes or cortical thickness. But we did find that dancers can activate their action observation network to a greater extent, and they differ in their patterns of functional connectivity that were related to structural connectivity. And now I would like to move on to our clinical trial in older adults, which is a very different situation. These are the people who don't have lifelong history of dance. They are older and their brain is already undergoing age-related changes. So this was a 6-month clinical trial where people were randomized into the 2 exercise groups, aerobic walking and dancing, and the active control group that consisted of stretching and toning. So participants had the same interaction with our laboratory team and with the study, but whatever they did was not increasing their aerobic fitness. And our participants were 60 to 80 years old. They were low active, but otherwise healthy. And we collected cognitive and brain data before and after the intervention. This is an example of one of the classes where you'll see that the complexity of the dance they were performing was consistently increasing over the classes. Also, the speed sometimes was higher. And it's also important to note, in those type of studies, we typically see more women signing up for the study. That's why we made sure in this combination of country dance and English folk dance that the gender roles were made neutral. So let me play. So this is how it looked like. And when we used diffusion tensor imaging, we observed a time by group interaction in the fornix, which is a part of the limbic system that also connects to the hippocampus. And in all other groups, we observed that there was an expected 6 months deterioration in white matter integrity. But in dense, this trend was reversed. And of course, this result needs to still be replicated in other samples. But we believe that this unique kind of stimulation of the fornix perhaps is due to the unique combination of exercise, cognitive, and social stimulation that dance provides. And then we also used another technique called the ratio of T2-1 and T2 weighted signal, which is supposed to be more specific to the myelin in the white matter. And we observed that in the control group, here you can see in black, that the control group also shown similar to the diffusion tensor imaging, that there was a decline in white matter integrity over 6 months. But we saw in some regions that this decline was less pronounced in the exercise groups, including dance, or even reversed. So this was the first evidence of adult plasticity in the adult aging brain in humans using non-invasive imaging. And this, we believe, is very important also in a context of dementia, aging, Alzheimer's disease, because this shows us that white matter that was often referred to as highways or cables of the brain that implies this passive infrastructure analogy, right? That it's not static, it's plastic, and this is consistent with newest animal research. And we also have seen this plasticity in the regions that are most vulnerable to aging and dementia. This means that white matter is a promising target for new therapies, but also dance is a very promising multimodal intervention that we believe would be more sustainable than just aerobic walking around the gym. It would be just much more fun, and it's more likely that people would maintain this type of activity over time. So just a very short summary. We showed that in young dancers, dance expertise was related to changes in brain function and brain structural connectivity. But in older adults, we have seen mostly changes in the white matter of the brain that were actually associated with cognitive changes. So greater improvements in white matter over 6 months related to better memory. So this again shows us that it likely was brain plasticity because it was cognitively relevant. This shows that, certain changes in the brain related to dance will be different among younger or older groups, depending on the level of expertise and maybe where they are with respect to brain aging. But I think it's very promising that dance could be used as the safe, healthy widely accessible form of intervention to support brain health. Thank you very much for your attention. And I also wanted to thank people who are key to the success of those studies at both Colorado State University and the Beckman Institute in Illinois. Thank you.
Great work, very inspiring, Aga. So we have some time for questions. Merle.
Yeah, and I'm allowed to ask questions. I'm going to.
Yeah.
I just thought it might be useful for you, Aga. So first of all, thank you for your great talk. And it's a million years ago since I did FA analyses on some DTI data, looking at now not dance experience or expertise, but rather on music, musical training. And what we did is we divided up our effects, correlating fractional dystrophy with either musical, like biographical information, how much they've trained in the past, versus their actual behavioral coordination ability. So we, as you are, I think, we distinguish between their skill and their training, which I think is something you've nicely created a distinction between. And in case this is useful, because you probably are aware that there's quite a lot of, the story on FA is kind of complicated, right? Whether or not you're looking for an increase in FA or a decrease as a function of increased performance. So if this is useful, so it's more a comment. I had to look up my old data because I didn't remember it, but I remember there was something. Is that we see an FA correlation with behavioral performance, such that biographical information, so how their amount of training shows a negative correlation with FA. So actually see a decrease in FA, whereas their actual skill was correlated inversely with greater FA. So it's maybe not relevant in that it's music and not dance, but we sort of are sort of aligning our results with yours there. But it might be something worth looking into, especially as you start distinguishing more between your experts and the people you're training. So it's more a comment, but maybe there's a question.
I'm actually very happy you mentioned this, because I'm really into, different methods of white matter imaging. And this is partly why you see that all of this work has been published already a good few years ago, because in the past years, I've been actually developing a new line of research where we use more advanced white matter imaging techniques. So we hopefully can resolve this issue about FA, not FA. And we use myelin water imaging, quantitative magnetization transfer, and some susceptibility imaging. So I don't have any data yet on, training and interventions, because we were just setting up those measures, but we are getting very nice results showing age trends and myelin over the lifespan. So this is kind of what I've been doing since I published those papers.
That's very good news. Again, it's been about a decade since I looked at that data, but it reminded me that this is a very difficult area, especially if you're looking for effects over a small period of time, 6 months intervention, right? You need something that's sensitive. So thank you so much, and great work on developing. Tell us more about the tools next time.
Thank you.
Yeah, more questions. Yasmin, were you having a question, or were you making some other gestures?
You're making her panic stricken now.
Okay. Question. Hata, yes.
Thank you. I'm curious for the cognitive, the result that you did not find cognitive transfer, and I'm just wondering whether the problem is with the dancing or with the tests we have for cognitive function. So, what extent we might actually, in order to go further with any form of more embodied cognition, or whatever you want to call it, maybe we have to get better tests. I mean, that's what we've been in our group inventing, different kind of tests, trying to be more, whatever the word is, but more take into consideration, enrich our bodies of tests to actually account for how dancing does change or impact or whatever, what we call cognition. Yeah, I wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I completely agree. We did use the tasks that were like, that we actually are used to using in the context of aging, because my expertise is primarily in aging. And here is the slide I did not show, where we really did not see much difference. It could be also that our groups were relatively small. And of course, I agree, you know, we did have this video game where dancers definitely performed better. And I would bet that if I turn off the video, they could still memorize those moves much better. So I do agree that when it comes to this embodied cognition, that we did not perhaps capture it correctly with those kind of laboratory pen and pencil or computer tasks. But yeah, and I must admit, this is not my perhaps expertise, and I don't think I'm gonna make much progress here because, as I mentioned, I'm trying to better understand the white matter measures. So I'm kind of more into MRI at the moment. But yeah, there was some, you know, smaller differences we could see, but where I actually believe the dancers performed poorer, if I remember correctly, but they were not significant. And again, I think it would definitely be good to repeat it in a larger sample using slightly tasks that are more, you know, tailored for this different type of training. So I completely agree that I don't think this is a definite result that we obtained. It's just, you're right, the measures that we used did not show transfer.
Yeah, and I'm also wondering, as a more experimental psychologist, whether in those tasks, if they're more used in the aging context, whether maybe for college students they're sort of close to ceiling or something like that.
Yeah, that could be true too.
Yeah. Anyway, Merle was I have
Yeah, I
another
just had a
question.
thought about the tasks, but something that we've been thinking a bit about looking more at individuals with ASD is cognitive flexibility, which is slightly more general,
Right.
higher level, but was obviously related to all of these other tasks, but which might be a sort of the actual mechanism that we're tapping into it with dance course, right? At least that's what we've shown in our data. So I don't know if there is even a task on cognitive flexibility that's easy to use in different populations, but that would be my guess.
I was also thinking, you know, when you really look at students who spend a lot of time in their dance classroom, it could be that on one hand they are better in one way, but maybe other students who are kind of engaging in more spatial memory by doing some engineering, they kind of compensate for it in a different way. So you're right, it's possible in the end we get ceiling effects for both. Just because they train it in a different way, but in young people we may not see you know, that much variability, so they may just come to the exact same spot as a groups. So
yeah, that's a good point too, because maybe they just get to the same points while spending less time in the classroom
in different ways, like, you know, different types of training can make them perform as a group in a similar way at that age, you know, when a lot of those tasks kind of tend to peak at their age. So
I also have just a very small question since we just have 2 more minutes. But I was kind of curious, did you see your sample evidence for more adherence to the intervention for the dance than the walking, since you claimed, you know, and I would agree that it seems likely that dance is more fun and therefore people will be more likely to actually follow it and do it. But I'm curious whether you also have any data on that.
it's a great question, and we did have it, but I don't remember it on top of my head. I would need to check it for you, because I can imagine, I don't know if there was a huge difference, because I think there are like 2 factors. On one hand, it's more fun. On the other hand, you interact more with other people more closely. And I just sometimes wonder if this, on the other hand, may not make some people less comfortable. So from what I remember, the differences were not huge.
Okay. Yeah, no, and I can also imagine that those effects are more obvious, like after an intervention is over and there's no longer this external imposed structure that forces people to do it, that then you would see more differences. Anyway, I think it's about time. Thank you so much, Aga, for this beautiful work.
Thank you.